Hello, we are here at the new campus of the Felix Nowowiejski Academy of Music in Bydgoszcz. We organize our annual music theory, music analysis conference titled Music in the World of Values and Meanings. We are very happy to welcome many Polish and international scholars, researchers, artists. One of them is my today's guest. Let us welcome Dr. Julian Hellaby from United Kingdom. Hello, Julian. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Malwina. I'm delighted to be here.
Let me just introduce our guest briefly. Dr. Julian Hellaby, formerly involved within Coventry University, London College of Music as the postgraduate program leader, an accomplished pianist, and also a researcher, recognized for his research, for example, within the semiotic field. And the semiotic approach was also present in your paper,
Yes.
Presented at the conference here.
Yes.
Could you please tell us a little bit more about it?
I will, yes, thank you. Well, it involved a comparison, a performance analysis of two very famous singers from the middle of the last century, Renata Tebaldi and Maria Callas. Although I'm a pianist, as you've just said, I've always loved opera as well.
Yeah.
And in fact, those were probably the first two names I came across when I was a child, starting to become enthused about opera. And in fact, Renata Tebaldi, that name, hers was the voice that probably I grew to love first. Maria Callas came a little bit later and was a little bit more problematic.
Okay.
But as time went by, I became more and more of a fan. And I won't go into any more detail other than to say it seemed like after I'd entered the sphere of semiotics, in particular the existential semiotics developed by Eero Tarasti, where it's looking at the inner self and the outer self. In other words, the kind of raw, untrained inner self and the way that interacts with society and becomes trained to a certain extent, to a greater, to a lesser extent.
Yeah.
And it struck me that that was a very good way of analysing the performances of these two great artists, Renata Tebaldi being the real exemplification of a trained singer, who to a certain extent maybe that inner essence was harder to discern. Whereas with Maria Callas, although she was highly trained, of course she was, and very, very intelligent woman, but that inner essence tended to come through much more clearly in her performances. So it struck me as being a very good vehicle for doing a semiotic, an existential semiotic analysis, after having described their performances and shown how they were received by the critics of the day. And what the critics said in much more layman's language more or less corresponded with the existential semiotic approach. So does that sort of give you an idea of what?
Yeah, I found that particularly fascinating how you adopted those semiotic tools into performance studies. It's,
Yes.
and how you were able to discuss, to distinguish between those two personalities. I personally really liked the metaphors of the angel and the devil you used.
Yes.
Well, the paper...
Well, that wasn't mine. That was actually. I think
that was Roland Barthes, or what was that?
It wasn't Roland Barthes. No,
yeah.
it was actually a contemporary division that I think just the press dreamt up.
But I think it fitted really well,
Yes.
the examples and this kind of opposition you introduced a little bit. Let me maybe remind our listeners that all the conference paper are live streamed on YouTube, and they will remain so.
Yes.
We may invite you to come back and listen to all the papers. Julian, you are a pianist,
Yes.
but you are also a researcher.
Indeed.
So I'd like to ask you a little about this double perspective, these double activities you undertake. Is it important for the performer to imply this kind of scientific research-based approach, and vice versa? Is performance practice helpful might it be helpful for the researcher? Is this kind of versatile approach important today for
becoming
artistic activities? Yeah.
Sorry. I think it's becoming more and more important, actually. When I was a student myself, there was a very big divide. You know, you went to a conservatoire and you studied how to play your instrument, and anything else was fairly subservient to that. Or, if you wanted to be an academic, you studied at university. As the years have gone by, the two have started to blend. And I think I was always, even though I was trained as a pianist and I started my professional career as a pianist and as a teacher of piano and sort of general music, I was always interested in reading about music and finding out about what people had said about it, biographies, analyses, but I didn't do it formally until I was probably about 40, actually. Yeah. And I was already working in a university, and they saying you must get a PhD. So the obvious route to go down was the one of performance studies, which was a growing discipline at that stage. Yeah. It's quite a big one now.
Right now, yeah.
But at that stage, it was still developing. But it seemed like the obvious choice. And I would say absolutely, to get directly to your question, the research that I've done, particularly, say, in topic theory, has informed the way I play. No question about that. Yeah. And I would say that performance also affects research, because obviously virtually all my research has been performance-based. I don't think I've written anything, and I've had a reasonable amount published now, anything that wasn't performance-based. Yeah. So the two things are very definitely complementary, I would say. And I think for any aspiring performer to know about what they're doing, to realise the kind of more philosophical, wider implications, is very helpful. There are plenty of people who don't do that and still play absolutely wonderfully. Perhaps I shouldn't mention names, but no, I won't mention names. But there's one very, very distinguished senior pianist I can think of who, if you asked them, I won't even say whether it's a man or a woman, about music, they would have no answer at all. They just play it.
Okay.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Because they do it wonderfully. Yeah. But at the same time, I think nowadays it's becoming harder to maintain a position like that, where you just play it and
isolated way.
In a very isolated, disconnected way, if you like. So I would say yes, the two are very definitely complementary, two sides of the same coin, if you like.
Yeah, here in Bydgoszcz you did present a paper about the singers, but I assume that you also talk about the piano repertoire, the music you perform. Do you combine those within this kind of lecture recital format as well?
Yes, obviously I was not going to stand up and sing in front of anybody yesterday. That would not have gone down very well. But yes, quite a lot of the presentations I've done at conferences have involved me playing. So, I mean, there was one I presented at last year in Warsaw, still in Poland, about a toccata by the Italian composer Alfredo Casella. And obviously I talked, I think that was actually fairly semiotic, if I remember rightly. Well, it would have been, it was a semiotic conference, wasn't it? So there was a semiotic element in the talk, but it involved me demonstrating bits and then sitting down and playing it. And I would say I've done a reasonable amount of that.
Yeah, this might be fascinating. I just have this thought that the conference hasn't ended yet, so maybe with some final, less formal meetings, we can have a little bit of singing out of you. I don't know. Maybe next time we can have you in Bydgoszcz presenting this kind of
piano-based
lecture recital format. This might be fascinating as well, I guess.
Most talks I've done have been piano-based,
Yeah, and I remember hearing some of them at the conferences related also to 20th century English literature, if I may recall well.
Absolutely, yes. That's something I've written and spoken about a fair bit. In fact, I'm involved in a project at the moment on musical canon and whether there's any such thing as an English-British, I should say, solo piano canon.
Yeah, so sounds fascinating. Yeah, let me just ask you about the theme of our conference, our Bydgoszcz conference, music in the world of values and meanings. Yes. We are somehow trying to follow a recent approach of music theory to search for meanings captured by music structures, by a musical work. For example, with use of semiotic or cognitive studies. Do you think this perspective is important?
Yes, I think even at the most sort of basic level, it's very important because people who know nothing about music or semiotics will say they went to a performance and it was very meaningful.
Yeah.
Now, if you ask them, what do you mean by that? They might struggle.
Yeah.
But the fact is that what we're talking about there is emotional or imaginative meaning. Because with music, it doesn't use words. Obviously, if it uses words, there's a semantic meaning.
That's a different,
It's
layer
different.
of meaning.
But if we're talking about purely instrumental music, the meaning is, it could be a narrative in a broad sense, and as much as there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, which is what narrative tends to be. Yeah. It could be meaningful in the emotional sense, in as much as it sparks off emotions within you, possibly memories,
expressive categories as well, I suppose.
Topics, we say. Yes, that's right. And then the imagination, of course, a lot of music, even if it's not specifically about, in inverted commas, say, the sea, might make you think of the sea, because there's something in it that sparks off your own, because it's all about the personal reception as well as whatever the composer intended. So I think that's another thing that's developed recently, is the fact that we as listeners, as receivers, make our own interpretations, which don't necessarily correspond with what the authors meant, if they meant anything.
Okay, I get the point. Was there anything surprising or particularly inspiring among the papers you've heard so far during the conference?
Indeed, yes. I mean, I've enjoyed all the talks, but I suppose being in Poland, and quite a lot of the talks being by people who are local or nationally based in Poland, I've learned a lot about Polish composers that I didn't know of before. Michelski, is that
Michelski, yeah, that's right.
That a very nice lady spoke about yesterday, and I really found myself engaged with that music, a sort of post-Stravinsky sort of style, and has inspired me to go and listen to some more. And then this morning, obviously everybody worldwide knows the name Górecki, but I didn't know that he had a son.
Yeah, Górecki the father and Górecki the son. Yeah.
So I learnt about the son this morning, and the choral music which was played was again extremely attractive. I mean, very accessible, very tonal. Right. For those people who don't know what I mean, are we speaking to a musically educated audience here, or do they know what tonal means? Or do I need
mostly.
You will,
mostly,
that's okay. So that was, I found, again, very, very attracted by that. And when I get home, I'll certainly look up more. Okay,
that's great. And let me just add that still we have a few interesting papers ahead of us. So I guess we may thank you for being our guest, and we may invite everyone to join us either live or online and follow the conference and the events.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you very much.